My presentation has the title Drawing Queer Anti-Fascist Lines. My name is Günter Gassner. I'm a senior lecturer in politics and design at the School of Geography and Planning at Cardiff University. I guess my interest in the theme of alterity is that on the one hand, I am interested in destruction, or if you like, liberation from constructions of the other as essentially strange. And on the other hand, I am interested in an embracing of difference, similar to what Arendt had in mind when she was saying that we are all the same in that we are all different. The paper that I present today is linked to empirical work that I have done in anti-fascist archives in Berlin, London, and Washington, D.C. And today I want to focus specifically on the intersection of queer activism and anti-fascism through the medium of drawing. In an archive in Berlin, I come across a document entitled Anti-Fascist City Map Kreuzberg, published by the Association of Victims of the Nazi Regime West Berlin in 1984. In this city map, 3 different types of places are highlighted. Black circles with white numbers denote places of fascist terror and persecution. Red triangles with white numbers define places that were important to anti-fascist resistance. Red squares with black numbers mark places of remembrance. This map is a modern city map, in which both fascism and anti-fascism are inscribed. The modern city map was developed and distributed in a context of rapidly growing Western industrial cities to provide orientation for city dwellers and travelers. As a large-scale representation of streets, squares, and buildings declared important, it is inextricably linked to marketable readability, recognizability, and the commodification of urban space. This means anti-fascism here is part of a capitalist instrument. It is fixed to certain places in the city, and it becomes tied to fascist events. Put differently, anti-fascism is made dependent on what it aims to destroy. It gives fascists even more importance than they already have in society, and it does not start out for overcoming fascism. In contrast to this map, in my current project, I am interested in anti-fascism's space-creating potential. And here I'm referring to all kinds of different types of spaces, from physical to digital and virtual spaces to dream spaces. I explore revolutionary strands of anti-fascism and examine anti-fascism as a positive spatial practice. A spatial practice can neither be reduced to the formation and design of physical spaces, nor can it be reduced to actions in space, especially not when these actions can be integrated into an existing space and thus have little or no potential to build new spaces. A spatial practice is political when it is driven by a desire for socioeconomic change. It is positive when it doesn't simply negate something or someone, and hence is dependent on that something and someone, but when it can create spaces on its own accord, so to speak, building on its own history, which, in the context of the radical left and anti-fascism, as we can learn from Walter Benjamin and others, can only be a history of the oppressed. I position anti-fascism in a triangle with and hence in relation to both fascism and the far right on the one hand and the liberal state on the other. What anti-fascism shares with the far right is an insurgent quality, yet in contrast to the latter, it is not based on an us against them ideology. What anti-fascism shares with the liberal state is egalitarianism, but in contrast to the latter, it does of course not content itself with formal procedures. This also means that I explore anti-fascism in relation to both conservatism and liberalism. For this presentation today, what is of particular importance is the conservatism of liberalism, which lies in an acceptance of society as it is, with the aim to integrate so-called deviant individuals into that society, assuming either that those individuals are sick or that they would be happier if they would be integrated. So to put this differently, the liberal idea of tolerance does not mean acceptance on an equal basis, but just a more subtle form of control of subversive groups. I understand anti-fascism not as a group, nor a movement, nor an identity, but as an illiberal intervention that doesn't rely on the state, the justice system, and liberal institutions. And in the context of revolutionary strands of anti-fascism, it doesn't only not rely on them, but fights them in an attempt to overcome a system that is based on three forms of exploitation: capitalism, racism, and sexism. Revolutionary anti-fascism, then, is inherently intersectional. Rosa Hamilton suggests that it were precisely queer activists who challenged cisgender heterosexual anti-fascists when they focused primarily and often solely on confronting fascists in the street while ignoring structural and symbolic violence. So in this presentation, or in the remaining minutes of this presentation, I want to focus on the British Gay Liberation Front in the 1970s. And I want to develop an anti-fascist reading of the British Gay Liberation Front to introduce aspects that I regard as critical for drawing queer anti-fascist lines. In her exploration of sexual orientation and Orientalism in queer phenomenology, Sarah Ahmed shows that spaces are always oriented. To be oriented means to know where we are when we turn this way or that way. It means to turn towards certain objects that help us find our way. It involves aligning body and space. Orientations are about how we encounter things as coming from specific sides. In a straight society, Ahmed argues, so-called queer effects are failed orientations, or put differently, queer effects successfully fail to follow dominant orientations. For Ahmed, these are, and I quote, oblique or diagonal lines that cut through straight lines created by bodies out of place. End of quote. Yet, what happens when bodies refuse to be out of place? What does queer anti-fascism as a place-making practice involve? Placemaking not as a conservative and liberal practice, as it is usually conceived in the disciplines of architecture, urban design, and planning, but placemaking as a revolutionary and illiberal practice. The emphasis then, I would suggest, is less on failed orientations, but on reorientations and new orientations. That is, the overcoming of classist, racist, and sexist orientations. The Gay Liberation Front, or GLF, was perhaps such a revolutionary illiberal placemaking practice. Here, queerness is necessarily anti-fascist, revolutionary, and intersectional. Anti-fascism, they argue, is rooted in revolutionary queerness, based on an analysis of everyday fascism that is inherent in capitalist society and linked to oppressive structures of heteropatriarchy and racism. Now, what is important to emphasize is that the GLF was not a civil rights movement. It did not inscribe itself into the liberal state. It was not solely concerned with the realization of legal and social goals, but with a liberation of the individual. It fought against male domination, sexism, and homophobia, and argued that no single revolutionary change in our social structures can be achieved without the whole system being changed. To put this differently, gay liberation is everyone's liberation. The GLF had close and sometimes difficult alignments with other movements and activists, including the women's liberation movement, black people liberation, the working class, and young people. What an exploration of the GLF's manifesto and its newspaper Come Together shows is the central position of drawings and images as tools for queer anti-fascism. Drawing here is a form of critique and an envisioning of alternative futures. With the help of drawing, a positive, a proud notion of queerness is being developed. I draw a line. In so doing, I draw connections and I draw distinctions. As I've suggested elsewhere, the line that I draw might inscribe itself in a regime of normality, might decenter that regime, or might spiral out of it, leading either to fascism or to a world without oppressions. Drawing as an ethico-political practice is not simply a creative exercise. It is an act of revolutionary imagining linked to and bound by lived realities, as Hannah Arendt, but also Achille Mbembe, remind us. For Chris Kemp, queer visual activism does not primarily strive to create visibility in the context of identity politics, but operates beyond clear-cut identity categories. Queer drawing can resist attempts to oppose any one reading onto them. And perhaps line drawings that are less mimetic of the physical world lend themselves particularly well to spurring a revolutionary emotional engagement with the world. The politics of queer lines renders categories of sexualities, genders, and spaces fluid. The politics of queer lines produces tensions in naming, categorizing, and politicizing. To put it differently, the politics of queer lines questions how politics operates. Queer activists in the 70s regularly shied away from using the term fascism. But there is no doubt that the persecution and the annihilation of gay people in concentration camps by the Nazis in Germany was a main driver for the intersectional practice. Attacks on neo-fascism often targeted the state monopoly on violence, attacking the police as fascist pigs. Unlike other gay movements, revolutionary gay liberation activists did not ask for tolerance and acceptance. They simply didn't want to be integrated into the existing system. Fuck the family, queer activists proclaimed. One of the primary aims of gay liberation is the destruction of the nuclear family, and that also means the destruction of the traditional family home. The nuclear family, or more precisely the patriarchal family, is not, as widely believed, the source of our happiness and comfort, they argue, but a place of sexism and male chauvinism where most women are accepted only on the basis that they are in fact less beings. The family is an expression of male power and male privilege. As the most basic unit of society, it is the starting point for all oppression. Abolishing the family and the cultural distinctions between men and women, alternative lifestyles outside the family have to be developed. For example, gay communes. These are not convenient living arrangements, but consciousness-raising environments where criticism and self-criticism become positive tools in the struggle, where the love and support from the rest of the collective help each individual in their struggle, and where the development of children becomes the shared responsibility of a larger group of people. A commune is not a ghetto. It is not detached from society, but an alternative lifestyle that makes space for itself in the city. Not out of place, but an integral and offensive part of the capitalist city. Revolution means the destruction of patriarchal authoritarianism, which is the substance of both family and capitalist organization, activists argued. The refusal to be out of place can also be seen by the GLF's aim to provide a real alternative to existing gay ghettos. We must not isolate ourselves from straight sexist society. Overcoming this society implies, and I quote, the complete negation of the use of gay bars, tea rooms, trucks, baths, streets, and other traditional cruising institutions. These are exploitative institutions designed to keep gay men in the roles given to them by a male heterosexual system. End of quote. These traditional cruising institutions have to be replaced by developing a communistic sexuality of sharing, cooperation, selflessness, and total community. The ghetto question implies that the meaning of liberation is a universal one. The main problem of the gay ghetto is, however, not that it is detached from society, but that it is only seemingly so, while in fact it is complicit in existing forms of oppression. First of all, the gay ghetto is a commercial infrastructure. It creates spaces that are driven by a profit-making agenda and hence counterproductive for a post-capitalist society. Second, the gay ghetto is an integral part of the liberal state that defends itself through actions by the police. The ghetto is an integral part of the control of queerness. It is part of the existing violent system. So the best, which means the worst, that the ghetto can achieve is integration, but never liberation. Against integration and for liberation, activists developed an aesthetic of abundance, overfilling urban space with, for example, radical drag. Radical drag as a liberation from male domination and stereotypes, making queer politics visible to non-queer audiences. Radical drag cannot be inscribed in the capitalist, racist, sexist city. It overfills urban places with non-normative and counter-hegemonic meaning-makings and in so doing creates new spaces. So, what does drawing queer anti-fascist lines in and for the city involve? These are not simply diagonal lines that cut through straight lines by bodies out of place, I would like to suggest. And these are not simply lines that represent an alternative city. Rather, through overfilling urban space, achieved by processes of juxtaposition and superimposition, these lines offend dualisms of the modern and the fascist city. They work against the fascist assignment of strict gender roles and identities. They work towards a gender-free city. They work against fascist control and penetration of all aspects of life, where privacy can only be achieved when one conforms politically and racially with the regime's norms. These lines make the private not only political, but radically political. These lines bring old and new together. In so doing, they work against the conservative reading of the past, such as Nazis' romantic idealization of the medieval city. These lines undermine solid materials and long-term aspirations, like the building of a Reich that is meant to last for 1,000 years. And these lines problematize what is deemed to be natural and cultural and insult fascism's understanding or conceptualization of an organic society and the conceptualization of an organic, or probably better, organismic city. Drawing queer anti-fascist lines is a non-binary practice that only through its engagement with binaries opens up horizons. While written and spoken words by the GLF often remain within the realm of identity politics, which shouldn't come as a surprise given that those activists operated in the 70s, the drawn lines have perhaps more promise to really contribute to everyone's liberation.